The telegram in Katherine Robbins's trembling hands bore news that would change everything, though she didn't yet know if that change would be her salvation or her doom. Standing on the dusty platform of Las Lunas, New Mexico Territory in the sweltering August heat of 1883, she watched the train that had carried her from Boston disappear into the horizon, taking with it any chance of turning back. The small carpetbag at her feet contained everything she owned in this world, which wasn't much after the fire that had claimed her parents' boarding house and their lives 6 months prior. She looked down at the creased photograph she'd been clutching for 3 days of travel. The man staring back at her had serious eyes beneath the brim of a wide hat, a strong jaw, and an expression that revealed nothing of his character. Kade Quinlan, rancher, widower, 30 years old. She was 22, old enough to know that answering his advertisement for a wife was either brave or foolish, but desperate enough not to care which. The platform was nearly empty now, just a few stragglers loading supplies onto wagons. Katherine smoothed her travel-worn dress, a dark blue cotton that had seemed practical when she'd packed it, but now felt suffocating in the territorial heat. Her corset was laced too tight, her high-necked collar chafed her skin, and the bonnet that protected her fair complexion from the sun felt like a woolen prison. A tall figure approached, and Katherine's heart lurched. The man from the photograph materialized before her, somehow more imposing in person. He stood well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that spoke of hard physical labor and sun-weathered skin that suggested years working outdoors. His shirt was clean but worn, tucked into dark trousers held up by suspenders. A gun belt hung at his hip, which made Katherine's mouth go dry. "Miss Robbins." His voice was deep, roughened by desert wind and sparse conversation. "Yes, Mr. Quinlan." She hated how small her voice sounded. He nodded once, his gaze taking her in with an assessment that felt neither warm nor cold, merely thorough. "Your trunk? This is all I have." She gestured to the carpetbag. Something flickered in his eyes, gone before she could read it. "The wagon's this way." He picked up her bag as though it weighed nothing and started walking. Katherine hurried after him, her worn boots kicking up small clouds of dust. The town of Las Lunas stretched before her, a collection of adobe buildings and wooden storefronts that looked nothing like the brick and cobblestone streets of Boston. Everything seemed bleached by the sun, painted in shades of brown and tan beneath a sky so impossibly blue it almost hurt to look at. The wagon was practical, a working vehicle with no concessions to comfort. Kade placed her bag in the back and then turned to help her up. His hands closed around her waist and Katherine flinched so violently she nearly fell. Kade released her immediately, stepping back. "I was just helping you up." "I know. I'm sorry, I can manage." She gripped the side of the wagon and hauled herself onto the bench seat, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. She could feel his eyes on her as he walked around and climbed up beside her. He didn't speak as they left town, and Katherine sat rigidly beside him, hyper-aware of every bump in the road that jostled them together. The silence stretched between them like a physical thing, growing heavier with each passing minute. The landscape rolled out in endless variations of brown earth and scrub grass, punctuated occasionally by rocky outcroppings and the distant purple shadows of mountains. "Ranch is about an hour out," Kade finally said. "We run cattle, about 500 head right now. Got 3 hands who help with the work. They bunk in the house, but I'll make sure they know to respect your privacy." Katherine nodded, unsure what to say. "There's a church in town, Father Martinez. If you want to marry proper, we can do that tomorrow, or we can wait if you need time to settle." Her hands twisted in her lap. "Tomorrow is fine." Another long silence. "Then you afraid of me?" The question was so direct it startled her into honesty. "I don't know you. That's not the same as being afraid." His eyes stayed on the road, but she could see the tension in his jaw. "The way you pulled away back there, that wasn't just nerves." Catherine's chest tightened. She'd hoped her fear wouldn't be so obvious that she could hide it until she learned to manage it. But sitting beside this large, silent man in the middle of nowhere, she realized how foolish that hope had been. If he was the kind of man who would hurt her, better to know now. "My father," she began, then stopped. The words were harder to say than she'd expected. He wasn't a kind man, especially when he drank. "My mother, she tried to protect me when I was young, but as I got older." She couldn't finish the sentence. Kade was silent for so long she thought perhaps he wouldn't respond at all. The wagon wheels creaked and somewhere a hawk cried out. Finally, he pulled the horses to a stop in the middle of the empty road and turned to face her fully. "Look at me," he said quietly. She did, forcing herself to meet his eyes. They were gray, she realized, like storm clouds. "I won't hurt you," he said. "I won't raise a hand to you in anger, won't force you to anything you don't want, won't make you afraid in your own home. That's my promise, and I keep my promises." "Why should I believe you?" The words came out before she could stop them. "Every man says such things." "Maybe so. But I'll prove it with time if you'll give me that time." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "My wife, Sarah, she died 2 years back. Fever took her. We had 5 good years together, and I never raised my voice to her in anger, let alone my hand. You can write to the Reverend in town if you want. Anyone who knew us will tell you the same. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you." He picked up the reins again but didn't start the horses moving. "I'm looking for a wife because I'm tired of being alone, and because a ranch needs a woman's hand to truly be a home. I'm not looking for someone to hurt or control. I'm looking for a partner. But I understand if you need time to trust that." Katherine felt something loosen in her chest just slightly. "What if I can't trust you, I mean? What if I'm too damaged for that?" "Then we'll figure it out together." He started the horses moving again. "I won't lie to you. I'm not good with words. I work long hours and I'm set in my ways. But I'll be patient with you, Katherine. I'll be gentle. That much I can promise." The way he said her name, soft and careful, made her eyes sting with unexpected tears. She blinked them away and stared at the horizon. The ranch appeared gradually, first as a dark smudge against the land, then as distinct buildings. The main house was larger than she'd expected, a single-story adobe structure with a deep porch that wrapped around at least 2 sides. There was a barn, several corrals with horses and cattle visible, a few outbuildings she couldn't identify, and what looked like a bunkhouse. Everything was well maintained, the fences straight and sturdy, the buildings in good repair. 3 men emerged from the barn as they approached. They were dusty and trail-worn, clearly just back from working. Kade pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and climbed down, then waited to see if Katherine would accept his help this time. She took a breath and extended her hand. His grip was firm but careful, steadying her as she stepped down. "Boys, this is Miss Katherine Robbins from Boston. She's to be my wife. Katherine, that's Miguel Torres, William Cassidy, and James Porter." The 3 men removed their hats in unison. Miguel was older, maybe 50, with silver threading through his black hair. William was young, probably not yet 25, with red hair and an easy smile. James fell somewhere in between, quiet and watchful. "Welcome, Miss Robbins," Miguel said, his accent marking him as a native New Mexican. "It will be good to have a lady at the ranch again." "Thank you," Katherine said softly. "Miguel's my foreman," Kade explained. "Been with me since I bought this place. The others have been here about 3 years each. They're good men, and they'll treat you with respect or answer to me." There was something in the way he said it, a quiet authority that made all three men nod seriously. "Let me show you the house," Kade said, picking up her bag again. The interior was dim and cool after the bright heat outside. The front door opened into a large main room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn furniture that looked handmade but sturdy, and Navajo rugs covering the packed earth floor. A dining table that could seat 8 occupied one end of the room. Through an open doorway, she could see a kitchen. "There are 4 bedrooms," Kade said, leading her down a hallway. "The hands used 2 of them. This one was Sarah's sewing room, and this is mine." He stopped in front of the last door, then seemed to reconsider. "Or it can be ours, or you can have it and I'll take the sewing room." "Whatever makes you comfortable." Katherine looked at the closed door, her heart pounding. "What do you want?" "I'd like to share a room with my wife eventually, but there's no rush. You've just arrived. Take the time you need." She nodded slowly. "May I see it?" He opened the door. The room was large and simply furnished. A big bed dominated the space, covered with a colorful quilt. There was a dresser, a washstand, a wardrobe, and a window that looked out over the land stretching toward distant mountains. It was clean and spare, masculine but not unwelcoming. "The bed's big enough we could put pillows between us if you want," Kade said. "Or I can sleep on the porch. Gets cool enough at night." Katherine turned to look at him. He stood in the doorway, leaving her space, his hat now in his hands. There was nothing threatening in his posture, nothing demanding. He was simply offering options and waiting for her to choose. "I'll take the sewing room," she said quietly. "For now, all right." There was no disappointment in his voice, just acceptance. "Let me show you." The sewing room was smaller but bright, with a window that caught the afternoon sun. There was a narrow bed, a small dresser, and a rocking chair in the corner. Scraps of fabric still filled a basket beside the chair, and Katherine wondered if they'd been left untouched since Sarah's death. "I'll bring in some extra blankets," Kade said, setting her bag on the bed. "And I'll make sure the hands know this room is private. They're good men, but I'll be clear about boundaries." "Thank you." He nodded and turned to leave, then paused. "Supper's usually around 6. I'll give you time to rest and settle in. If you need anything, I'll be in the barn." After he left, Katherine sat on the bed and allowed herself to really breathe for the first time since stepping off the train. The room smelled faintly of lavender and dust. She looked around at the evidence of another woman's life, the woman who had been here before her, and felt like an intruder. But she was also safe, or at least safer than she'd been in a long time. That had to count for something. She unpacked her meager belongings, hanging her 2 dresses in the small wardrobe and placing her few personal items on the dresser. A photograph of her mother, taken before her father's drinking, had gotten truly bad. A book of poetry, water stained from being saved from the fire. A small jewelry box with her mother's wedding ring and a locket. It took less than 10 minutes to unpack her entire life. Katherine lay down on the bed, intending to rest just for a moment, and fell into an exhausted sleep. She woke to darkness and the smell of something cooking. Panic seized her for a moment before she remembered where she was. New Mexico. The ranch. Kade. She fumbled to light the lamp on the dresser and saw that someone had left a pitcher of water and a basin for washing. She cleaned her face and hands, smoothed her hair as best she could, and ventured out into the hallway. The main room was lit by lanterns and the glow from the fireplace. The 3 ranch hands sat at the dining table with Kade, all of them looking up as she appeared. "Sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to sleep so long." "You were tired from traveling," Kade said, standing. "There's stew and biscuits. Miguel made it. He's the best cook among us." Miguel smiled. "My mother taught me well. Please sit. You must be hungry." Katherine took the seat Kade pulled out for her, trying not to flinch when he moved near. If he noticed, he didn't comment, simply moved to the kitchen and returned with a bowl of stew and a plate of biscuits. The food was good, hearty and flavorful, and Katherine realized she was indeed starving. She'd barely eaten on the train, too nervous and nauseated from the constant motion. The men talked as they ate, discussing work that needed to be done, cattle that needed moving to better grazing, fences that needed mending. They included her politely, but didn't expect her to contribute to conversations she couldn't possibly understand. William asked a few questions about Boston, seeming genuinely curious about the city, and Katherine found herself relaxing slightly as she described the harbor and the public gardens. After supper, the ranch hands excused themselves to the bunkhouse, and Katherine helped Kade clean up despite his protests that she should rest more. "I need to do something useful," she said. "I'm not accustomed to being idle." "What did you do in Boston? For work, I mean." "I helped my mother run the boarding house. Cooking, cleaning, laundry, keeping the books. After they died, I worked as a seamstress for a few months, but I wasn't very good at it. My stitches were adequate but not fine enough for the quality work that pays well." "Can you manage a household budget?" "Yes, I'm good with numbers." "That's useful. I could use help with the ranch accounts. I manage, but it's not my strength." He dried the last plate and set it on the shelf. "The hands do their own laundry, but if you want to take over the cooking, Miguel wouldn't object. He only does it because someone has to, or if you'd rather not, that's fine too. I'm not expecting you to take over everything at once." "I'd like to help. It will make me feel less like a burden." Kade turned to face her, leaning against the counter. In the lamplight, his face looked softer somehow, less intimidating. "You're not a burden, Katherine. You're going to be my wife. A wife you had to send away because no one here would have you." The words came out more bitter than she'd intended, and she immediately regretted them. But Kade just shook his head. "I could have found someone here if I'd wanted. There are women in town, good women, who have made it clear they'd be interested. But after Sarah died, I wasn't ready. And then when I was ready, I realized I didn't want someone who knew me only as Sarah's widower, someone who would always be comparing themselves to her or expecting me to be the same man I was before she died. I wanted a fresh start. Does that make sense?" Katherine nodded slowly. "Yes, actually. It does. What about you? Why did you answer my advertisement?" "Because I had nowhere else to go," she said honestly. "And because I thought perhaps distance would help me start over too, become someone other than the girl who was afraid all the time." "Are you still afraid now?" She considered the question carefully. "Less than I expected to be." A small smile touched his lips, the first she'd seen from him. "I'll take that as progress. Come on, I'll show you the rest of the house before it gets too late." He gave her a tour of the kitchen, showing her where everything was kept: the root cellar for food storage, the well outside, the chicken coop where they kept a dozen laying hens. The ranch was more self-sufficient than she'd realized, with a large garden that was currently producing tomatoes, squash, beans, and peppers. "Sarah planted most of this," Kade said, gesturing to the garden. "I've kept it up as best I can, but it could use someone who actually knows what they're doing, if gardening interests you. My mother had a small garden behind the boarding house. I could try. No pressure. Just thought I'd mention it." When they came back inside, Katherine suddenly felt awkward. It was full dark now, time for bed, and she wasn't sure what the protocol was. In the letters they'd exchanged before she came, they discussed practical matters like what work needed doing on a ranch and what life in New Mexico was like, but they hadn't discussed things like bedtime routines or expectations. "I should retire," she said finally. "All right. I'll be up for a while yet, checking on some paperwork, but I'll be quiet." He paused. Katherine, I meant what I said earlier. I'll be patient. Don't feel like you have to rush anything. Thank you, she whispered. In her small room, Katherine changed into her nightgown and braided her long brown hair. She could hear Kade moving around in the main room, the rustle of papers, the scratch of a pen. Ordinary domestic sounds that should have been comforting, but instead reminded her of her father, working late on the boarding house accounts before coming to her mother's room angry about money. She forced the memory away and climbed into bed. The sheets smelled like sunshine and sage, clean and fresh. Through the window, she could see more stars than she'd ever seen in her life, scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Sleep didn't come easily despite her exhaustion. Every creak of the house made her tense, waiting for footsteps that didn't come. When she finally dozed off, she dreamed of fire and woke gasping, disoriented in the darkness. A soft knock sounded on her door. "Katherine, you all right?" She sat up, heart pounding. "Yes, sorry, just a bad dream." "Can I get you anything? Water?" "No, thank you, I'm fine." "All right. Good night." His footsteps retreated and Katherine lay back down, staring at the ceiling. He hadn't tried to come in, hadn't demanded to know what she'd dreamed about, hadn't gotten angry at being disturbed. Such small things, but they mattered. Morning came early on the ranch. Katherine woke to the sound of men's voices and the lowing of cattle. She dressed quickly in her other dress, a simple brown cotton, and emerged to find the kitchen empty but coffee already made on the stove. Through the window, she could see Kade and the hands working in one of the corrals, roping and checking cattle. She found eggs in the coop, vegetables in the root cellar, and set about making breakfast. By the time the men came in, dusty and hungry, she had eggs, fried potatoes with peppers, and warm tortillas waiting. "You didn't have to do this," Kade said, but she could see the appreciation in his eyes. "I wanted to." The men ate with obvious enjoyment, complimenting her cooking in ways that made her cheeks warm. After breakfast, Kade asked if she'd like to ride into town for the wedding. "We should leave soon if we're going. Father Martinez said he could do the ceremony this morning." Katherine's stomach flipped. "All right. You can still change your mind." "No, I came here to marry you. I should follow through." "That's a hell of an unromantic way to put it," he said, but there was amusement in his voice rather than offense. The ride to town was easier than the day before, though Katherine still felt tense sitting beside him. They didn't talk much, but the silence felt less oppressive. Las Lunas was busier during the day, with people moving between shops and children playing in the dusty streets. The church was a beautiful adobe building with a bell tower and carved wooden doors. Father Martinez greeted them warmly, a round man in his 60s with kind eyes and a gentle manner. He asked them a few questions about their intentions and their faith, seeming satisfied with their answers, then led them to the altar. The ceremony was simple and quick, conducted partly in English and partly in Spanish. Katherine found herself repeating vows in a daze, hardly believing this was actually happening. When Father Martinez told Kade he could kiss his bride, Kade looked at Katherine questioningly. She nodded, and he leaned down to press the gentlest of kisses to her lips, barely a touch at all, over in a heartbeat. "Congratulations," Father Martinez said, beaming. "You are now husband and wife." They signed the registry, with the priest's housekeeper and a local shopkeeper called in to serve as witnesses. When it was done, Kade offered Katherine his arm, and they walked back out into the bright sunlight as a married couple. "How do you feel?" Kade asked as they climbed back into the wagon. "Strange, like I'm in someone else's life. If it helps, I feel the same way." They stopped at the general store to pick up supplies, and the proprietor, an energetic woman named Mrs. Chen, congratulated them enthusiastically, and insisted on adding a bag of peppermints to their order as a wedding gift. On the way back to the ranch, Kade said, "I know this isn't what most women dream of for their wedding day. No fancy dress, no celebration, no family. If you want, we could have some kind of party later, invite people over." "No, this is fine. I have no family left to invite and I don't know anyone here yet." "You will in time. It's a good community. People look out for each other." When they arrived back at the ranch, Miguel had somehow managed to prepare a special dinner despite having been working cattle all morning. There was roasted chicken, fresh bread, and even a small cake. "For the bride and groom," he said, looking pleased with himself. Katherine felt her eyes sting with tears at the thoughtfulness of it. These men who barely knew her had gone out of their way to make the day feel special. The meal was pleasant, with the men telling stories about the ranch and the area, and Katherine found herself laughing at William's tale of trying to rope his first steer and ending up face first in a water trough. For a few hours, she almost forgot to be afraid. But as evening approached and the hands retired to the bunkhouse, the tension returned. Kade seemed to sense it, because he poured them each a small glass of whiskey and gestured to the porch. "Come, sit with me for a bit." They sat in rocking chairs watching the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and purple. The air cooled rapidly once the sun was down, bringing relief from the day's heat. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Kade said. "One thing I never get tired of out here. It's different from anything I've ever known. Boston feels like a different world. Do you miss it?" "I miss my mother, but the city itself, not really. There's too much pain tied up in those memories." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." Katherine tensed. "All right. What you told me yesterday about your father, did he—" Kade paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "Did he force himself on you?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Katherine's hands gripped the arms of her rocking chair so tightly her knuckles went white. "No," she said quietly. "He came close a few times, especially toward the end, but my mother always intervened. She'd get between us, distract him, lock my door from the outside. She protected me in that way, even though she couldn't protect herself or me from his fists." Kade exhaled slowly. "I'm sorry. No child should have to live like that. He died a year before the fire, drank himself to death. I thought we'd finally be free, and we were for a while. My mother was happier than I'd seen her in years. And then the fire happened, and she was gone too, and I realized I was more alone than I'd ever been even when I had her." "You're not alone anymore," Kade said quietly. "I barely know you." "That's true, but we've got time to fix that." He stood and held out his hand. "Come here, I want to show you something." She hesitated, then took his hand. He led her off the porch and away from the house, stopping when they were far enough from the lamplight that the stars overhead blazed impossibly bright. "Look up," he said. Katherine tilted her head back, gasping at the sheer number of stars visible. The Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light. "I come out here sometimes when I can't sleep," Kade said. "Reminds me how small my problems are in the grand scheme of things, how big the world is, how many possibilities exist beyond whatever trouble I'm facing. It's beautiful." "You're beautiful," he said, and she could hear the sincerity in his voice. "I know you're scared, Katherine. I know you have every reason to be, but I meant every word of those vows today. I'm going to be the kind of husband you deserve, the kind who makes you feel safe instead of afraid. I just need you to give me the chance to prove it." She turned to look at him, his face barely visible in the starlight. "What if I can't get past this fear? What if I'm always going to flinch when you touch me? Then we'll figure out how to work around it. There's no deadline on this, Katherine." No requirement that you be perfect or healed or anything other than exactly who you are right now. That's very patient of you. I'm a rancher. Patience is half the job." He smiled slightly. "The other half is stubbornness, which I've also got in spades." Despite everything, Katherine laughed. The sound surprised her, bubbling up unexpectedly. They walked back to the house together, and when they reached the door, Kade said, "I'm going to sleep on the porch tonight. Not because I'm upset or avoiding you, but because I think we both need space to process everything that's happened today. Tomorrow we can talk about more permanent arrangements. You don't have to do that. I know I want to." He squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. "Good night, Katherine Quinlan." The sound of her new name made her breath catch. "Good night, Kade." She went to her small room and changed for bed, but sleep eluded her for a long time. She kept thinking about Kade's words, his patience, the gentleness in his touch. It was so different from what she'd known that she almost didn't trust it. Almost. The next few weeks developed a rhythm. Katherine took over the cooking, much to Miguel's delight, and began managing the household accounts. She tended the garden, collected eggs, and slowly began to make the house feel like a home. Kade worked long days on the ranch but always came in for meals, and they fell into the habit of sitting on the porch in the evenings, talking about their days. He told her about the ranch, how he'd bought it 6 years ago with money saved from working as a trail hand and wrangler. How Sarah had been a teacher in town before they married, organized and efficient where he was chaotic and scattered. How they'd planned to have children, but it had never happened. And then she'd gotten sick so quickly there'd been no time to prepare for losing her. Katherine told him about Boston, about helping her mother run the boarding house, about the strange collection of people who'd passed through over the years. She told him about learning to read by candlelight after her father had forbidden books in the house, about her mother teaching her to cook and sew and manage accounts. She even told him about the fire, how she'd been at the market when it started, how she'd run back to find the building engulfed in flames and her mother already gone. Each conversation revealed new layers, built new connections. Kade made her laugh with stories about ranch mishaps and Miguel's ongoing war with a particularly stubborn rooster. She taught him to make proper biscuits, which he'd never quite mastered, and he taught her to ride, patient and encouraging as she learned to handle the gentle mare he'd assigned to her. But at night, they still slept separately. Kade on the porch when weather permitted, in the main room by the fireplace when it didn't. He never pressured her, never even mentioned sharing a room, and Katherine found herself grateful and frustrated in equal measure. Grateful because she genuinely wasn't ready, frustrated because part of her worried she'd never be ready, and then, what would their marriage be? One evening about a month after the wedding, a storm rolled in fast and fierce. Katherine had never experienced weather like it, the sky turning green-black, the wind whipping around the house with enough force to rattle the shutters. Rain came down in sheets, and lightning cracked so close she could smell the ozone. She was in the kitchen cleaning up after supper when a particularly loud thunderclap made her drop the plate she'd been washing. It shattered on the floor, and as she bent to pick up the pieces, another crack of lightning illuminated the room like daylight. She was suddenly back in Boston, back in the boarding house, flames everywhere and smoke choking her lungs. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't grip the broken pottery. "Katherine," Kade's voice came from somewhere far away. "Katherine, you're bleeding." She looked down to see blood dripping from her hand, though she couldn't feel any pain. Kade gently took her wrist and led her to a chair, kneeling in front of her. "Look at me," he said quietly. "You're safe. It's just a storm. You're here with me in New Mexico, not in Boston. The house is not on fire. You're safe." She focused on his face, using it as an anchor to pull herself back to the present. Gradually, her breathing slowed and the shaking subsided enough for her to register what he was saying. "There you are," he said softly. "It's just a cut, not too deep. Let me clean it up." He fetched clean water and bandages, cleaning and wrapping her hand with surprising gentleness. His hands were calloused from work but careful, never pressing too hard, making sure the bandage was secure but not too tight. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Nothing to apologize for. Storms are loud, broken plates happen. I was back there. In the fire, I could smell the smoke. I figured." He finished with the bandage and sat back on his heels, still kneeling in front of her. "Happens to me sometimes too, though for different reasons. I'll be somewhere and suddenly I'm back watching Sarah die, unable to do anything to help her. The mind plays tricks when we've been through trauma. How do you make it stop? I don't know that it ever completely stops, but it gets easier. The episodes get less frequent, less intense. And it helps to have someone who understands, who can pull you back when you get lost in it." Lightning flashed again, and Katherine flinched but didn't spiral this time. Kade stayed where he was, close but not crowding her, his presence solid and grounding. "The storm sounds worse than it is," he said. "This adobe is thick, we're perfectly safe. Will you stay with me?" The words came out before she could stop them. "Just until it passes, of course." He pulled a chair over and sat beside her, close enough that she could reach out and touch him if she wanted but not so close that she felt trapped. They sat in the flickering lamplight listening to the storm rage outside, and gradually Katherine felt her panic subside completely. "Thank you," she said eventually. "Always." When the storm finally passed and the rain softened to a gentle patter, Kade helped her to her feet. "You should rest. It's been a hard evening." She nodded but found herself reluctant to let him go. "Kade, I think I'm ready to try sharing a room. Not tonight, but soon." "Would that be all right?" His expression softened. "Whenever you're ready. There's no rush." 3 days later, Katherine moved her few belongings into the main bedroom. They established a routine where Kade dressed in the other room in the mornings to give her privacy, and Katherine changed into her nightgown in the evenings after he was already in bed with his back turned. The first few nights, she barely slept, hyper-aware of his presence beside her, but he kept his promise and stayed on his side of the bed, making no demands. Gradually, she relaxed. She began to notice small things about him, like how he always woke before dawn, how he read by lamplight before sleeping, how he was careful never to wake her when he got up. She noticed the way he moved, economical and purposeful, and the way his face softened when he looked at her. One morning she woke to find herself curled against his side, her head on his shoulder. She started to pull away, but his arm tightened gently around her. "It's all right," he murmured, still half asleep. "You're safe." She relaxed back against him, and something tight in her chest loosened. His body was warm and solid, and she could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong. For the first time in her life, she felt what it was like to wake up next to someone and feel safe instead of afraid. "Good morning," she whispered. "Morning." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head, casual and affectionate. "Sleep well. Better than usual." "Good." They lay there for a few more minutes before the demands of the day called them back to reality. But something had shifted, some invisible barrier had cracked. The days grew cooler as autumn approached. Katherine had been on the ranch for 3 months, and it had become home in ways she hadn't expected. She knew the rhythms of the work, the personalities of the animals, the quirks of the house. She'd made friends with Mrs. Chen in town and some of the other ranch wives in the area. She'd proven herself capable of managing not just the household, but also helping with ranch accounts and correspondence. And she'd fallen in love with her husband, though she hadn't told him yet. It wasn't a sudden realization, but a gradual accumulation of moments. The way he always saved the best piece of meat for her at dinner. How he'd spent a whole day building her a better chicken coop when she'd mentioned the old one was drafty. The patient way he answered her endless questions about ranching. The genuine interest he showed in her thoughts and opinions. The fact that in 3 months he'd never once raised his voice to her in anger. Never been anything but gentle and kind. She loved him, and it terrified her almost as much as her father had, because loving him meant he had the power to hurt her in ways that had nothing to do with physical violence. They were working in the garden together one Saturday afternoon, Katherine showing Kade which plants to pull and which to leave when he suddenly said, "I need to take a herd to market in Santa Fe next week. I'll be gone about 10 days. Katherine's hands stilled in the dirt. "Oh. Miguel will stay here with you, and William. James will come with me. You'll be safe, and there's plenty of other ranches nearby if you need help with anything. I'm sure we'll be fine. I don't like leaving you so soon after the wedding. If the market could wait, I'd put it off, but we need the money before winter." "It's all right, Kade. I understand." He reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "I'll miss you." "I'll miss you too," she admitted. His eyes searched her face. "Katherine, I know we haven't talked about it, but I want you to know that this marriage has become real for me, not just practical or convenient, real. You've become important to me," her heart hammered in her chest. "You've become important to me too. Good." He smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed his whole face. "That's good." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and kissed her. It was different from the chaste peck at their wedding, deeper and more meaningful, but still gentle. Katherine found herself kissing him back, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Kade rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for weeks. You should have. I was waiting for the right moment. Was this it?" "Seemed like it." He pulled back, his thumb tracing her jaw. "We should probably finish this before it gets dark." They worked together in comfortable silence, but Katherine's mind was racing. That kiss had awakened something in her, a longing she'd never expected to feel. She'd thought physical intimacy would always be tainted by fear, but with Kade, she found herself curious rather than afraid. That night, as they lay in bed, Katherine turned toward him instead of facing away. He was reading by lamplight, and he looked up in surprise when she touched his arm. "Yes. I want to try something, but I need you to promise you'll stop if I ask you to." He set the book aside immediately. "Of course, always. Kiss me again." He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, slow and sweet. Katherine let herself sink into it, exploring the feeling of his lips on hers, the warmth of his body close to hers. When his hand moved to her waist, she tensed slightly but didn't pull away. He kept the touch light, not demanding, and gradually she relaxed again. They kissed for a long time, nothing more, until Katherine finally pulled back. "Thank you. For what? For being patient, for letting me set the pace." "Katherine, I meant what I promised. I'll always be gentle with you, always give you control." He brushed his thumb across her cheekbone. "There's no rush for anything. We have our whole lives." "What if I want to rush?" she asked softly. His eyes darkened slightly. "Then I'd say we should make sure you're really sure, not acting out of obligation or pressure." "I'm not. I'm acting out of wanting to be close to you. But I'm also scared. Of me hurting you, of it hurting, period. I've heard women talk. It sounds painful, especially the first time." Kade was quiet for a moment, then said, "It can be if it's done wrong, but it doesn't have to be. Not if we take our time, make sure you're ready. And if at any point you want to stop, we stop. No questions, no pressure. You'd really do that. Stop in the middle without hesitation." He kissed her forehead. Katherine, your comfort and well-being will always be more important to me than my physical needs. Always. She believed him. That was the astounding part. After a lifetime of not trusting men, she believed this one completely. Not tonight, she said, but soon, after you get back from Santa Fe, whenever you're ready. The night before Kade was set to leave, Katherine lay awake long after he'd fallen asleep, watching him in the moonlight that streamed through the window. His face was peaceful in sleep, younger somehow, and she felt a fierce surge of affection for this man who'd shown her what kindness looked like. In the morning, she woke to find him already dressed and packing. She got up and made a large breakfast for him and James, who would be traveling with him. "You take care of her," Kade told Miguel seriously. "Anything happens, anything at all, you send word. She'll be safe, boss." "You have my word." Kade pulled Katherine aside for a private goodbye. 10 days at most, probably less if we make good time. Be careful, watch out for bandits. Always do. He kissed her, long and thorough. "I'll be thinking about you. I'll be thinking about you too." She watched from the porch as he and James rode off with the cattle, feeling strangely bereft. The ranch seemed too quiet without his presence. The days passed slowly. Katherine kept busy with her usual tasks and took on some of Kade's paperwork, determined to help where she could. Miguel and William were respectful and kind, but it wasn't the same. She found herself counting down the days until Kade's return. On the 8th day, a rider came from town with news that made Katherine's blood run cold. There had been an attack on the trail to Santa Fe. A group of cattle thieves had ambushed a herd and there had been shooting. Several men were injured and one was dead. "Do they know who?" Katherine asked, her voice shaking. "Not yet, madam, just that it was a herd from this area." Miguel gripped her shoulder. "Don't assume the worst. Could be any number of ranches. I'll ride to town and get more information." The hours Miguel was gone were the longest of Katherine's life. She tried to keep busy but couldn't focus on anything. She paced the house, started tasks and abandoned them, and finally just sat on the porch staring at the horizon. When Miguel finally returned, his face was grim. It was Kade's herd. Katherine's world tilted. "Is he alive?" "Yes, he's injured but alive. James is fine. They're in Santa Fe recovering. Kade sent word for you not to worry, that he'll be home as soon as he can travel." "How badly injured?" "Shot in the shoulder. Lost some blood, but the doctor says he'll be fine." Katherine stood up. "I'm going to Santa Fe, madam. That's a 3-day ride." "I don't care. Saddle my horse." "Katherine," Miguel said gently. "He said not to worry. He's my husband and he's hurt. I'm going." Miguel looked at William, who shrugged. "She's the boss's wife. If she wants to go, we should probably let her go. I'll ride with her." They left within the hour, Katherine wearing borrowed trousers and carrying supplies for the journey. William kept them at a steady pace, not so fast as to exhaust the horses, but not slow either. They camped the first night under the stars, and William kept a respectful distance, always making sure Katherine felt safe. They reached Santa Fe on the afternoon of the 3rd day, and William led her to the hotel where Kade was staying. Katherine rushed inside and asked for his room number, her heart pounding. She knocked on the door and James opened it, his eyes widening in surprise. "Mrs. Quinlan, what are you doing here?" "Where is he?" Kade's voice came from inside. "Katherine." She pushed past James and into the room. Kade was sitting up in bed, his shoulder bandaged and his arm in a sling. He looked pale and tired, but his eyes lit up when he saw her. "What are you doing here?" he asked, "making sure you're all right." She crossed to the bed and knelt beside it, taking his good hand in both of hers. "I heard you were shot. It's not as bad as it sounds, just a flesh wound. I'll be sore for a while, but I'll heal. You could have been killed, but I wasn't." He squeezed her hand. Katherine, you didn't have to ride all this way. I would have been home in a few more days. Yes, I did. I had to see for myself that you were all right. She touched his face gently. I was so scared. Something in his expression shifted. Yeah, yes, because I love you. The words came out in a rush. I love you, Kade. I don't know when it happened exactly, but it did. And the thought of losing you before I could tell you was unbearable. He pulled her up onto the bed beside him, mindful of his injured shoulder, and kissed her thoroughly. I love you too. Have for weeks now. Been waiting for the right time to say it. This is a terrible time, she said, laughing through tears. You're injured and in a strange hotel, and we have an audience. James cleared his throat. I'll just go check on the horses. After he left, Katherine helped Kade settle more comfortably against the pillows. Tell me what happened. He told her about the ambush, how the thieves had come at night while the herd was bedded down, how there had been shooting and chaos, and he'd taken a bullet while protecting James, how they'd managed to drive the thieves off, but had lost about 30 head of cattle in the process. Could have been worse, he said. Could have lost the whole herd, or James, or my life. When can you travel? Doctor says a few more days. Why? Because I want to take you home. She kissed him softly. I want you in our bed in our house where I can take care of you properly. I like the sound of that. They stayed in Santa Fe for 4 more days, waiting for Kade to be strong enough to travel. Katherine took over his care, changing his bandages and making sure he rested and ate properly. The hotel owner, a kind woman named Mrs. Valdez, helped her prepare nourishing meals and find clean linens. During the long hours of recovery, they talked more than they ever had, about everything and nothing. Kade told her about his childhood in Texas, growing up on a small farm, losing his parents to cholera when he was 16. Katherine told him about the good years before her father's drinking got bad, when he'd been kind and her mother had been happy. You think we'll have children? Katherine asked one evening. I hope so, if that's what you want. But there's no rush, we have time. I'd like a family. A real one where the children feel safe and loved. Then that's what we'll build together. The journey home was slow, with frequent stops to let Kade rest. William and James flanked them protectively, always on guard for trouble. But the trip was uneventful, and by the time they reached the ranch, Kade's color had returned and he was moving more easily. Miguel met them at the door, relief evident on his weathered face. Good to see you, boss. And you, madam. Thank you for bringing him home. Thank you for holding down the fort, Katherine said. The next few weeks were focused on Kade's recovery. Katherine wouldn't let him do any heavy work, enlisting Miguel and the hands to keep him from pushing himself too hard. She cooked his favorite meals, read to him in the evenings, and generally fussed over him in ways that made him both exasperated and pleased. I'm not an invalid, he protested one afternoon when she brought him tea and insisted he rest instead of checking fences. No, but you're still healing. Humor me. He pulled her down beside him on the porch swing. Only if you stay here with me. She settled against his good shoulder, careful not to jar the injured one. I can do that. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in brilliant colors. Katherine felt a contentment she'd never known before, a sense of belonging that went bone deep. Katherine, Kade said after a while, thank you. For what? For coming to Santa Fe, for taking care of me, for loving me. He kissed the top of her head. For being brave enough to give me a chance despite everything you'd been through. You made it easy. You showed me what it feels like to be treated with respect and kindness. You taught me that not all men are like my father. I'll spend the rest of my life proving that to you, he promised. By November, Kade was fully healed, and life on the ranch returned to its normal rhythm. The weather turned cold, and they had their first snow, a light dusting that made everything look magical. Katherine stood on the porch watching the fat flakes fall, and Kade came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Beautiful, isn't it? I've never seen snow like this. In Boston, it just made everything gray and dirty. Here, it's pristine. Wait until we get a real storm. Then you might change your mind. She leaned back against him, feeling safe and warm despite the cold air. Kade, I'm ready. For what? She turned in his arms to face him. To be your wife in every way. His eyes darkened with understanding. Are you sure? I'm sure. I love you and I trust you and I want this. That night, after the ranch hands had retired and the house was quiet, they lay together in their bed. Kade took his time, kissing her slowly, touching her gently, making sure she was comfortable with each step. When Katherine tensed, he paused and soothed her with words and gentle caresses. When she gave him permission to continue, he was so careful, so patient, that the discomfort was minimal and brief. Afterward, she lay in his arms feeling transformed. Not because of the physical act itself, but because of what it represented: complete trust, complete vulnerability, complete love. Are you all right? He asked, stroking her hair. I'm wonderful. No regrets, none at all. She kissed his chest right over his heart. I love you. I love you too. So much. They fell asleep tangled together, and Katherine dreamed of the future instead of the past for the first time in years. Winter passed in a blur of snow and cold, cozy evenings by the fire, and learning to be truly married. Katherine discovered she enjoyed the physical aspects of marriage far more than she'd ever expected, and Kade was always attentive to her needs and careful of her past. Spring brought new life to the ranch. Calves were born, the garden began to bloom again, and Katherine discovered she was pregnant. She told Kade one evening after supper, standing in the kitchen where they'd spent so many hours together. I'm going to have a baby. He froze, a dish halfway to the shelf. What? I'm pregnant. About 2 months along, I think. He set the dish down carefully and crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. Katherine, are you happy about it? Yes, are you? Happier than I can say. He held her close, his face buried in her hair. A baby, our baby. Are you crying? Maybe a little. He pulled back, and his eyes were indeed wet. Sarah and I tried for so long, I'd given up on ever being a father. Well, now you're going to be one. How do you feel about that? Terrified and thrilled in equal measure. He placed his hand on her still flat stomach. Thank you. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Katherine continued her normal activities well into the summer, though Kade fussed over her and tried to keep her from doing anything strenuous. Mrs. Chen and the other ranch wives in the area were generous with advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. In October, as the leaves were turning gold and the air grew crisp, Katherine went into labor. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when Kade, pacing outside the bedroom while Mrs. Chen and her daughter attended Katherine, thought he might go mad with worry. But finally, just after dawn, a baby's cry rang through the house. Mrs. Chen opened the door and smiled. You have a son, a big, healthy boy. Come meet him. Kade entered the room to find Katherine exhausted but radiant, holding a squirming bundle. She looked up at him with tears in her eyes. Kade, meet your son. He took the baby carefully, awed by how small and perfect he was. The infant had a shock of dark hair and serious gray eyes that seemed to look right at him. He's beautiful. You're beautiful. I was thinking we could name him Thomas, after my mother's father. He was the only family member who tried to help us when my father's drinking got bad. Thomas Quinlan. I like it. He sat on the edge of the bed and they looked at their son together. Thank you, Katherine, for this, for everything. We made him together. Thank me for nothing. Over the following months, they settled into parenthood. Thomas was a good baby, healthy and strong, though he had his father's stubbornness and his mother's determination. Katherine proved to be a capable mother, though Kade often found her sitting in the rocking chair in the middle of the night, simply watching Thomas sleep with wonder on her face. "Can't believe he's real sometimes," she admitted one such night when Kade found her there. "I know the feeling." He knelt beside the chair. "You're a wonderful mother. I'm trying to be everything mine was and nothing my father was. You're succeeding." As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. Kade expanded the herd, bought more land, and hired 2 more hands. Katherine managed the growing household with efficiency, keeping the books, maintaining the garden, and raising their son while also being Kade's partner in every sense of the word. They had discussions about every major decision, and Kade valued her opinion on everything from which bulls to buy for breeding to whether they should invest in more horses. She had a good head for business, and together, they made the ranch more successful than it had ever been. When Thomas was 2, Katherine became pregnant again. This time it was a girl, born on a snowy December morning. They named her Sarah Katherine, honoring both the woman who had come before and the woman who was here now. "Sarah would have loved this," Kade said, holding his daughter. "She would have loved you. I wish I could have known her. In a way you do. This ranch, this house, that garden you love so much, she's in all of it, and now she's in our daughter's name." Sarah turned out to be a spirited child, full of energy and curiosity. She and Thomas were close despite their age difference, and watching them play together filled Katherine with a joy she'd never imagined possible. The years passed in a happy blur. They added 2 more children, a boy they named Michael, and then another girl, Emma. The house that had once felt empty now rang with children's laughter and the constant activity of family life. Miguel stayed on as foreman until he was too old to work, at which point Kade insisted he retire to the small house they built for him on the property. William married a girl from town and moved to his own homestead nearby. James eventually became the new foreman, proving himself capable and trustworthy. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Kade took Katherine back to the spot where he'd shown her the stars on her first night at the ranch. The children were spending the night with Miguel, who spoiled them shamelessly. 10 years, Katherine said, looking up at the familiar stars. "It doesn't seem possible. Best 10 years of my life." He wrapped his arms around her from behind. "When I sent off that advertisement looking for a wife, I never imagined I'd find someone like you. Someone terrified and damaged. Someone brave and strong. Someone who took a chance on a stranger in a strange land. Someone who gave me love and a family and made this ranch into a real home." He turned her to face him. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Katherine Quinlan. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, too. You showed me what love looks like, what it feels like to be safe, what it means to be cherished." She kissed him softly. "You kept your promise. You were gentle when I needed gentleness, patient when I needed patience, and strong when I needed strength. It wasn't hard. Loving you has been the easiest thing I've ever done." They stood under the stars, holding each other. 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. 20 years after that telegram brought Katherine to New Mexico, she stood on the same porch where she'd first learned to feel safe, watching her grandchildren play in the yard. Thomas had married and taken over management of the eastern pastures. Sarah had surprised everyone by becoming a teacher like Kade's first wife. Michael was learning the business side of ranching and showing real aptitude for it. Emma, the youngest, was still at home, though she'd be leaving for school in Santa Fe soon. Kade came out and handed Katherine a cup of coffee, settling into the rocking chair beside her. His hair was more gray than dark now, and time had carved deeper lines in his face, but his eyes still warmed when he looked at her. "Happy?" he asked. "Impossibly so." There are days I have to remind myself this is really my life, that all of this is real. It's real. 22 years of real. 22 years of love and laughter and family. 22 years of feeling safe. 22 years of you keeping every promise you made. He reached over and took her hand. And many more to come if I have anything to say about it. Katherine squeezed his hand, looking out at the land they'd built a life on, the children and grandchildren they'd raised, the home they'd created together. She thought about the frightened girl who'd stepped off that train so long ago, running from pain and hoping for something better. She'd found so much more than better. She'd found everything. The sun set behind the mountains in a blaze of color, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, the same colors that had awed her that first night. But now she didn't watch the sunset with fear or uncertainty. She watched it with contentment, with gratitude, with love. "I love you," she said to Kade, words she'd said thousands of times over the years, but that still felt important to say. "I love you too," he replied, his thumb tracing patterns on the back of her hand. "Always have, always will." As darkness fell and the stars began to emerge, Katherine thought about how strange and wonderful life could be. How pain could transform into strength, fear into courage, loneliness into love. How a single decision to take a chance, to trust a stranger's promise to be gentle, could change everything. She'd taken that chance, and it had given her a life beyond her wildest dreams. A husband who cherished her, children who filled her days with joy, grandchildren who carried their love forward into the next generation. A home where she was safe and valued and loved. The ranch would continue long after they were gone, passing to their children and their children's children. But the love they'd built here, the kindness and gentleness and respect that had been the foundation of everything that would last even longer. Katherine had confessed her fear all those years ago, standing beside a stranger in a wagon. Kade had promised to be gentle, and he'd kept that promise every single day since. In doing so, he'd given her more than safety. He'd given her love, partnership, family, and home. He'd given her everything. As they sat together in the peaceful evening, watching their grandchildren be called inside for supper, Katherine reflected that sometimes the best stories were the ones that started with fear and ended with love. Sometimes taking the biggest risk led to the greatest reward. Sometimes a promise made was a promise kept, and that made all the difference. She rested her head on Kade's shoulder, feeling his arm come around her, steady and sure. This was home. This was love. This was the happy ending she'd never dared to dream of but had somehow, miraculously, found. And it was more than enough. It was everything.